So, what's trending? Bridging your Catholic faith with your everyday life. You're listening to Trending with Timmery on Relevant Radio.
Welcome to our marriage hour every Thursday here on Trending, and we would love to hear from you. One of our favorite guests here on Trending is Christina Pineda. She's a matchmaker. She's our in-house matchmaker on Trending, and it's so cool because I'm hearing about people who are working with her and finding love and looking to kind of get answers to those difficult questions about of dating and relationships. And today, this episode with Christina, we'll talk a lot later on about being a newlywed and some of kind of those newfound experiences of intimacy and preparing for marriage. Whether you've maybe engaged a little bit in sexual intimacy before, maybe this is a new experience for you. So new thresholds to be crossed, we'll be discussing that. We'll also discuss this new trend of how there are new marriages occurring. There's an uptrend. There's been a royal wedding if you missed it. And I know we've got to watch the hats and the dresses. These are always fun things. But I want to talk about some new concerns surrounding marriage and relationships. So we'll talk about that, especially maybe you or someone you know wants to wait till marriage to have sex, but they have a lot of fear. And maybe they're willing to try things out to see how things are going, or maybe they think, why not have fun and enjoy myself before marriage? What are the legitimate reasons for waiting till marriage to have sex? So if you want to have kind of some more tools in your tool belt to help talk to friends or maybe live this out, this is the episode for you. Feel free to give us a call with your questions at 1-888-914-9149, or head over to my Instagram story. You can follow me by heading over to relevantradio.com/trending. You can connect on social media. Find me at Timmery, and go ahead and comment in that comment box on my Instagram story of questions you might have during the show. If you're not quite ready, to give us a call and ask those questions and have your voice heard. Kicking off the show, we've been doing some pop take bullet points for the show, and there are two things I want to mention real quickly. First, is Twitter really censoring free speech? It's interesting. So there appears to have been an unprecedented hacking of Twitter. You may have heard today about the Bitcoin scam, including the hacking into various Twitter accounts such as Elon Musk, Bill Gates, and former Vice President Joe Biden, among others. But here's something you might not have heard about the whole story. Images have been released from the hack that show an internal interface from the back end of Twitter, and it shows a blacklist programming tool. Lean in here because you should know about this. This included labels including a search blacklist and a trends blacklist. So this would include what topics and accounts appear in trends and search sections on Twitter. In other words, the content you receive is actually being filtered. Now, here's my take on this. How do you get your content? Do you read multiple sources? Do you just go to Twitter, Facebook, Instagram? Are you a meme person for your news? What's your means of getting information? Because I think this is a hardcore reminder for each of us that actually maybe we need to engage in more person-to-person contact for perspectives, news, and information, to get multiple perspectives and viewpoints. I can tell you, we're in our marriage hour now. One of the things I love is to actually hear the perspective my husband has on various topics, because he follows different news and processes things from a different perspective, both a man's perspective and the filtration system that he himself has set up for news that he engages with. But also, I have to emphasize, we really do need to keep our ear to the ground and have real life conversations with real people, and not just censor ourselves by the social media searches or various websites that are kind of our go-to. We can all be guilty of this. Now, another piece of information, take a deep breath here. It's a heavy topic. It surrounds the sex abuse scandal and a recent announcement that the Vatican has made. And I have to tell you, I know a lot of people have really struggled with the lack of crackdown at times from the Vatican about official policies, and I get it. I do have to say, having worked within the Catholic Church here in the United States, after the first wave of sex abuse scandals back in the 2000s, many churches, I can speak for here in California, have really implemented good strategies, tactics, and training programs for volunteers and staff members. With regard to mandated reporting, understanding and identifying signs of sexual, emotional, and physical abuse, I remember I had to do this when I was a minor and then do hours upon hours of training just to be a volunteer to work with youth. There have been events that I've not even been able to enter into if youth were involved and I didn't have that training done. So a lot of good work has been done to protect young people, but there's still a lot more that I admit and I agree should be done, especially from an overarching policy perspective that the Vatican implements. And unfortunately, we don't always see that being pushed, that same level of expectation being pushed on some of the leaders as are implemented on just staff and volunteers. And so the Vatican is encouraging this as of today, that even if a, say, religious leader or bishop is looking at reporting some form of abuse, that they shouldn't just appeal to local laws and essentially do the minimum, that even if it's not required for them to report on a particular abuse, that they still should. And I think this is common sense. Let the authorities, experts in dealing with criminals and abusers, handle a possible accusation. Don't take it upon ourselves as the church to determine whether or not so-and-so is guilty. We need to report. And so if you're involved, whether in the church or outside of the church, don't just go to some superior at your job. Make a real report to try and protect people and contact the police so that they can do something and use their skills and tactics. And so I really do hope that the Vatican continues to enforce and develop better policies to report sex abusers. But this is a really good step in the right direction. And it's simple. It's good citizenship. So well done to the Vatican on this one, but we can do more, right? And we need to ask for this as well and not pull off of it. You're listening to Trending with Timmery. It's great to be with you. I received a question on Instagram that I thought would be really beneficial for us to talk about. It's from a woman who was raised in not a Christian home, but was baptized last year as a Catholic in her 20s, and she's getting married in the church this September. Congratulations and welcome to being Catholic, and congratulations on your forthcoming marriage. But she talks about how her new faith is so important to both her and her fiancé. But she feels like some things that were deep-seated in her are preventing her from living that, what she hopes to be a very biblical marriage and to be a biblical wife. And so she asks for advice to really ease up and allow for her fiancé, soon-to-be husband, to take on his role as a husband. Okay, this story is a story of married, unmarried, dating, and engaged. It's really difficult in today's culture to live the Christian biblical ideal for marriage. So I want to talk briefly about what that is and some practical tips that we really do need in order to live this out. Even if you think you're doing a great job, if you are doing a great job, be a model. Seek out relationships with those people, especially maybe a few years behind you, who could benefit. Okay, so here's the reality. The struggle is real not to try to lead in your relationship. I get it. I was single for quite a while, used to taking care of myself, very independent. You're sharing that you were raised to be independent and not rely on anyone but yourself, to be an adult. And in many ways, this is great. But you recognize that your relationship with your fiancé is being impacted by it, and you're concerned about the long-term impact for your marriage. You commented on how you love that the Bible presents that spouses should rely on each other. And you also really understand that your fiance wants to lead, but you're kind of used to taking initiative and maybe even controlling a lot of situations. We've got to pray to let go of some of that control. And I want to commend you for wanting to ease up and move forward and allow your husband to take on the role of being a husband and to really take on the love of being a wife. So here's what I have to say. I admire you for your humility and desire to live a faithful biblical marriage. You're not the only one who's struggling. I want to start by emphasizing that the church and the Bible emphasize in this beautiful cohesive teaching about marriage that there is supposed to be male leadership within the family life. In fact, Chastity, a church document written by Pope Pius XI back in 1930. I love reading something that's like almost 100 years old, 1,000 years old in the church, because sometimes we allow our modern viewpoint of our faith to be the only perspective and lens we look at things. And we think, well, Catholicism has changed. No, it hasn't. And this is important. So in Chastity, it talks about how, in fact, this male leadership, the leadership of the husband, really is meant to be emphasized. In fact, it gives this example of how the husband is meant to be the head of the family and the home, and how the woman is called to be the heart. But when the husband's not the head, the wife then has to step in and play the role of the head and the heart, and at times vice versa. And so there's an important balancing act that has to occur. And this is where I just have to say for a second, amen, praise the Lord, that marriage is a sacrament, because it just knocks us on our butts and reminds us that we need the grace in order to live this out. I mean, Jesus Christ went to the wedding feast of Cana, and there he helped supply the necessary graces for that marriage to be what it needed to be. It's a perfect example. They didn't have enough wine. They didn't have enough to do what was necessary to even celebrate their wedding, yet alone live it out. This is a great example and reminder for us. And actually, that's why we celebrate our marriage hour on Thursdays, because it's the luminous mysteries. And we actually pray and meditate on that decade of the wedding feast in Cana. So here's the reality. Desiring to take control of the relationship, being the first one to take initiative, is one part personality and a big part sin. I am guilty of this as well. But I can tell you, when I pull back and encourage my husband to lead, or give him the space to lead, and just kind of shut my mouth, things turn out better. And that's not easy. In fact, in Genesis chapter 3, we read that part of the fall, part of the consequence of the fall, is that for us women, our desire will be for our husbands. And a lot of the commentary on this talks about how, in fact, it's for us to control our husbands, not just be with them, but to control them. That's not anything that any Christian wife has ever done. I don't know about you. So it's a good reminder for us. And of course, I'm just talking from the female perspective here because that's the question. But I want to encourage you to do this. One, surround yourself with examples of a biblical marriage lived out. Be careful with the media influences. Study ideals, read old literature of examples of marriage, and identify good examples in media and be willing to call them out when they're not good examples. We need these models, and we need to invite them into our lives, especially the saints as well, who set an example of this. You see, we have to keep this ideal in our face, or the world will tell us otherwise. So if we're not constantly checking back in with the beauty of what the church teaches about marriage, we're going to have a hard time being edified in that type of lifestyle. Also, I want to encourage you to tell your fiance that you're struggling and ask him to help you. Ask him for a couple areas where you might be able to pull back and leave the reins to him. He's not going to do things your way, and it's important to remember that, especially when we've been single and used to having that control. So work on learning to trust and overcome that fight or flight mode where we have to do things and panic and take control of the situation or things won't get done. Practice behavior modification. Don't tell or nag or take control, but find areas to offer up sacrifices in relation to your struggle. And set him up for success and yourself by saying, hey, you take this. And maybe it starts with wedding planning. Maybe you're giving the honeymoon plan to him and you're backing off, allowing it to be a surprise. That's one simple way to start. But ultimately, pray to the Holy Spirit to direct you and opportunities to let your fiancé lead. And pay attention and slow down to what he says, asks, does, and even what upsets him. It'll give you the opportunity to really work on this perspective of a Christian biblical marriage. You're listening to Trending with Timmery. If you'd like to join the conversation, the number is 1-888-914-9149. My guest today is our in-house matchmaker from Matchmakers in the City, Christina Pineda. And I'm really excited because we've talked a lot about the struggle of marriages during the quarantine, but we haven't really talked about this uptrend of marriages. In fact, Christina, you've recently been following Princess Ria of Jordan, who's recently gotten married in the midst of the coronavirus pandemic. Tell us more, including a little bit about the beading and lace on that gorgeous dress.
Hi, Timmery. So great to be back on with you. Yes, I know this, I guess because we talked about divorce last time and how there have been a lot of celebrity divorces during the pandemic, but recently I started noticing all of the marriages that have been occurring, and not even just celebrities or royals, but we've seen a lot of couples in our circle and our matchmaking worlds getting married, and then just seeing, especially a lot of Christian couples getting married. So it's also nice to see news stories of people pushing past the times that we're living in and going forward and making that beautiful commitment with each other before living together. And that was, I've been trying to figure out why are all these couples getting married at this difficult time, because also a lot of people are a little upset that they can't do the wedding the way that they had initially wanted to, with having as many guests as they wanted. And I think you've probably talked to a lot of couples about that too, and it can be very disappointing, but it does place a lot of emphasis, and the couples who I've seen get married, especially the Catholic and Protestant couples, they've told me that it's placed a lot more emphasis on the nature of the sacrament of marriage rather than all the bells and whistles that go along with it, even though I loved partly planning my wedding. I loved having the ideas, and I had some help, which was good. But it's nice to think about all the details. However, to focus on the sacrament has been really helpful for the couples who I've been in touch with and counseled throughout this time.
I want to get your advice on something, Christina. And if you're just joining us, that's Christina Pineda from Matchmakers in the City. Christina, with new marriages, relationships, dating, come a lot of concerns. And I know that you coach a lot of people who are going through this journey. Why do you advise your clients? Of course, I know you're Catholic, but, just overall from the perspective of your business, working with non-Catholics, why do you advise them to wait until marriage to both live together and wait till marriage to have sex?
Yeah, that's hugely, hugely important. And if you don't even look at it from a religious perspective, you can look at it from more of a scientific perspective. And I bring this up. I coach all people, whether they're religious, whether they're Catholic, whether they're secular. I coach everyone, and this really hits a nerve with them. I cite the book, The Cohabitation Effect, which is Dr. Meg Jay's book. It's actually Dr. Meg Jay's book, The Defining Decade, and she discusses the idea, the cohabitation effect. And this shows the problems with living together in a very scientific way and a very psychological way, that 50% of couples are more likely to get divorce. There's a huge uptick of divorces that come out of people living together before marriage. And then the reason for this, she says, is that the couples tend to be testing things out they're looking for the negatives in the relationship instead of working through those challenges together when you're actually married and you made that commitment to each other. People are critical of each other to begin with, but especially when you're living together, it's hard. And those are not deal breaker situations, whether someone likes it a little cooler than the other person. Those things can blow up into major fights. And so that's a big reason why it causes a lot of people to get out of relationships or have. And the reason why some of them end up getting married is because after that and then divorcing is because they have entangled themselves so much in this relationship and with finances, with all their stuff is together, that it's hard to take themselves out of it. Sometimes marriage is just they think, okay, let's just do it so I don't have to deal with the drama of moving my things out. And then the marriage, they haven't built that foundation beforehand. And if they're living together, they're also not they're not paying attention to the way that the Lord wants relationships to mature and that living together is for marriage. So things end up usually exploding in either before the marriage or after the marriage.
And Christina, we were talking earlier about male leadership and how, especially as women, married and unmarried, we struggle to even allow the smallest decision or sense of leadership to be initiated by the man in relationships. And when we live together, it kind of gives this attitude of 50-50, and that's not really a thing. So it's setting off the relationship on the wrong foot, especially when you want that ideal of Christian marriage and male leadership, which our faith calls us to.
Yes, I know. After you spoke about the advice of the young woman who wrote that lovely comment into you, I was saying amen, and I was laughing and thinking, wow, Timmerie, this is great advice, because it's so hard to let go of control and plan things as a woman who likes planning. As I said, I loved partly planning my wedding, but
come on, we just love planning life.
It's true, but I think a lot of times people will get into the living together mode because they think, oh, well, if we do this next step, then he's more likely to marry me. And that's very I'm not calling women manipulators who think like that, but we do tend to, if we're with a guy, we want to get married to them, we do want to think of all the ways that we can make that happen. And if you're not following the Lord's guidelines, that would be thought as, oh, well, maybe that will help us get to that goal. But it's really controlling things in the wrong way, and maybe this isn't the man who the Lord wants you to be with. And so the control that you're talking about with taking the masculinity away from the man, of him able to lead the relationship, and which is very important, we also have to let the Lord lead our lives, and we have to pay attention to the Holy Spirit and what He wants for our romance and our future, rather than trying to plan it all out in our perfect mindset of how things should go, because if it's not God's plan, it's going to crash and burn.
I would love your thoughts on this argument that I commonly hear, Christina, with regard to kind of living together. Many people will make it from a very practical perspective. They'll say, this isn't what I want, but it's the most cost-effective option for me. And it's hard because I can give all of the logical arguments, the social science arguments, the faith-based arguments. I mean, you have a soul and you have relationship goals. This is putting a future marriage in jeopardy. What are kind of your bullet point responses to this argument of cost effectiveness?
Oh, wow. Yeah, I know. Then the first thing, if they're faithful, the first thing I'll say, if there's someone who cares about their faith, the first thing I'll say is, what's more important, money or your relationship with God? And God will provide for you. If you're doing things His way, He will provide. Don't worry about the money. That is not a concern, that should not be a concern of yours.
We'll be right back with Christina Pineda, our matchmaker, here on Trending with Timmery.
We're talking about what you're thinking about. You're listening to Trending with Timmery on Relevant Radio and the Relevant Radio app.
We're back on Trending, and there's a question that came up that I've heard asked so many times before. Christina Pineda from Matchmakers in the City, she's a co-founder and a matchmaker, is here to speak with us, and I want to throw this your way, Christina. Why are more secular Protestant girls willing to say yes to a first date than Catholics? I actually see that this is common. Catholics are more hesitant versus kind of in the secular and Protestant world. They're a little kind of more willing to chomp at the bit with regard to saying yes to a date.
Wow. It's so funny that's a thing, because a lot of many Catholic young women who I work with are very open to going on a first date with a good man, and I've coached them to be. So I want any men listening to not let that deter you from that. This might be a common trend, but not all Catholic women are like that. And I want you to keep pursuing women. And I'm sorry that this man who asked the question has experienced that, but I am really happy that he's actually asking women out, because that isn't that common nowadays, especially in Christian circles. And I hear so many Protestant and Catholic women say, I just don't know. I wish the guys in my young adult group would actually ask me out, but they're not. I don't know what I'm doing wrong. And a lot of times they're not really doing anything wrong. I tell them great advice of how to interact, and we talk about dropping the handkerchief and all these things for women to do. And sometimes the guys don't even pick up the hints.
I'm
so excited.
Right.
Oh, really?
Are you teaching the bend and snap over there, Christina?
Well, maybe Alessandra would want to, but we kind of rein it in a little bit more than that.
Alessandra's your sister and co-founder, right?
Yes, she's a little more.
There can be some casualties.
About those things.
Yeah, there can be some casualties, as we know, with the bend and snap from Legally Blonde. I just have one comment on this, because it sounds like you're seeing a totally different perspective. Not a lot of men. I mean, to begin with, not a lot of men are asking girls out, but then, girls often are willing if they're interested in marriage. But I think that when I do see girls being hesitant to commit to a date, or maybe leading guys on and confusing them as well, part of it, I will say, in the super Catholic world, I see a problem as where Catholics can kind of be in this fake discernment, or quote unquote praying about it mode, where in reality they're using their faith as a crutch to be indecisive. And so I think that in the super Catholic world, that's where I think it can be a problem, because there are people who do want to get married and date, but they're not willing to just allow it be a date, because they think they're committing to marriage when they say yes.
Exactly. I was just going to say that, Timmery. I completely agree with you that the problem with some very religious Catholic women would be that they think that if they say yes, they're committing for life, and it's a date. And the problem with being so specific, and a lot of times if they might have this list of exactly what they want in their future husband, and if a man doesn't tick off those boxes, they won't even give them a chance for the first date. So I encourage the women who are listening to have fun, go on dates, enjoy yourself. Don't worry that even if there's even a minuscule possibility that you might have a good time with this person and it could lead somewhere, go on the date. Obviously, if you're convinced that it will, because there are some people who it's just not worth going on a date with if you know that there's a lot of reasons why, but more serious reasons why. But if it's just generally a nice guy, just say yes and enjoy yourself. And the more dating happens, the better, and you'll get closer to your future husband.
Amen. I want to talk about really this fear that many people have with regard to waiting till marriage to have sex. We can talk about consequences of not doing this, one of which you mentioned. For those who don't know, the actress Charlotte York from Sex and the City actually saw her marriage fall to pieces after marrying Trey McDougal, who actually struggled with an erectile dysfunction as a result of this. Can you speak a little bit as to why, when we don't wait, there are lots of consequences?
Yes, and there are so many reasons why it's better to wait to be married, to be physically intimate. But I guess I hear all of the excuses of, but wait, but what if this happens or what if that happens? And on the guy's side, it's pretty easy to just say, if a man says to a woman, oh, I just want to see her physical, I won't get married unless I know that we have physical chemistry. So sometimes men will give that excuse of why they're not going to save themselves, and it's easy to just say no. You can know if you have physical chemistry with someone, if you are attracted to them, if you can dance well together, if you want to be around the person. That's just a stupid excuse. So that's an easy one. But this one from Charlotte, this example that you bring up from Charlotte from Sex and the City marrying Troy, is a little bit of a harder one to discuss. And women will say this to me, and I always tell them that sexual sins underlie all sexual dysfunctions. For instance, Troy had a porn addiction. I don't think Charlotte had talked to him about that before they got married in the series. And this is obviously Sex and the City is fictional. But I don't think she talked to him. She finds this out later in therapy with him. And this is an important point, that when you're discerning marriage with someone, you really do want to ask those hard questions to ensure that they don't have those kinds of addictions, or if they have, that it's something that they're not doing anymore, that they've grown from it, and that's not part of their life anymore. So I just want to encourage women who are nervous that they might marry a guy who has that problem, that you can find out if you ask the right questions. And that's an important way. You also have to trust the Lord that when you've done all this research beforehand, you've worked together on these things, that He will guard you and He will show you the truth. But that's how I would answer that question.
I think that's such an important thing to emphasize and re-say. You said all sexual sins underlie sexual dysfunction. It's just kind of like the issue of pornography. People think like, oh, it's just a little thing. It's just a habit. No, a pornography addiction is a sex addiction, and it impacts a man's ability to perform. And that's such an important thing to talk about, because I've listened to the sports channel, and there are a whole lot of ads for Viagra and erectile dysfunction disorder. And so we have to be honest here, because we're seeing 20-year-olds, newlyweds, who are struggling with this, and they had no idea that pornography, masturbation could be an issue here.
Yes. That's so true, Timmery. And it even goes on to what you're looking at on Instagram. It's just, you have to have guardianship over your eyes, both men and women.
Amen. So I want to go ahead and get your thoughts here. So with regard to dealing with this within the context of a relationship, how do you create the space necessary while dating chastely to discuss the level of intimacy that is going to be engaged in, but also concerns as to why this is so important?
Yeah, I think for this one, I always emphasize boundaries, physical boundaries. I've talked a little bit about this with you before, that setting up places where you're going on your dates that are more public, that you don't have that temptation of being over each other's apartment and one kiss leads further than you thought it would. So making sure that you initially set those physical boundaries and don't play with fire, because we're all can succumb to temptation, and those those things are so easy to get dragged into. But there was actually a bachelorette who I was date coaching who knew that she wanted to save herself for marriage, but she didn't set physical boundaries ahead of time, and she didn't also know really the reasoning behind why she wanted to save herself. It was more, she just knew that was, she didn't want to have sex before marriage. That was the one thing. And then she ended up feeling violated by an ex-boyfriend, and it was hard for her to trust men in the future and get rid of the shame that she had experienced after going through that relationship.
It is such a good example, because I think so many people do want to wait till marriage, but then they don't set themselves up for success. They don't have boundaries, and there's a whole lot of heartbreak that can be carried into future marriage, even just dating relationships, or even being willing to open up your heart yet again to the possibility of relationship, love, or even how this influences the possibility of having children as well, that fear that can kick in.
Yes, that's so true. And intimacy is beautiful, but it's something that many Christians don't really look into, or it's either fear that surrounds it, or they just don't have any knowledge on it, and they've already crossed many boundaries. So there's a lot that needs to be prepared for, even when you're single, to make sure that you're looking into these matters and reading the books that talk about theology of the body. For instance, the reasoning behind the importance of purity. And the top books that I recommend to people are Christopher West's is a great person to start with. The Introduction to Theology of the Body, his Introduction to Theology of the Body, and then you can go a little deeper and read St. Pope John Paul II's Love and Responsibility and his Theology of the Body. Those are great foundational books to understand why is it important to save myself for marriage, and why is it so beautiful. Those are more of the reasoning behind it, and then you can get a little more you can get a little more practical when you're preparing for marriage and you are engaged. There's other books that I recommend for people who are in that phase, but for the people who are wanting to save themselves and they haven't gotten engaged yet, start with those books.
And a book that I love, 10 out of 10, it's a small book, and it really prepares you for that theology of the body, because sometimes it can be a little heavy, is a book called Men, Women, and the Mystery of Love. It's practical insights pulling from St. John Paul the Great's work in Love and Responsibility, which he wrote before Theology of the Body, that really touches on the male and female heart and preparing us for the struggles, the real struggles that we're going to have in really discovering that mystery of love that we all desire within relationships. We'll be right back here on Trending with Timmerie. My guest is Christina Pineda. You can find her at matchmakersinthecity.com.
So, what's trending? Bridging your Catholic faith with your everyday life. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie on Relevant Radio and the Relevant Radio app.
Welcome back. Joining me today is Christina Pineda, and we just can't get enough of this matchmaking and love and the topic I want to dive into, because this is so important. I have to say, this is one of those sensitive topics that we don't really talk about, and that's how to prepare for intimacy within marriage. It's a beautiful thing, but there are two camps. Some who go into marriage without any knowledge about sexual intimacy, and those who have crossed many boundaries and don't know how to regain a sense of boundary within a relationship and are hurting. There can be a lot of wounds that come up. So, Christina, let's first talk about those who are fearful and new to sexual intimacy. I mean, have been so blessed and have really waited till marriage to engage in sexual intimacy.
Yes, I love how you pointed out that dichotomy, because that's so true, Timmerie. And I think the best way for someone who's new to marriage or maybe preparing for marriage is to to dive into the subject of intimacy, because it doesn't just happen. It's something that you work on together as a couple. It's not perfect. It's not something that you can, oh, we're married, so now everything's great perfectly with intimacy, especially if this is totally new to you. So it's something you work on together as a couple. And I recommend couples to read certain books together. One of them is Dr. Popchak's Holy Sex. And then for a more practical guide for intimacy, Dr. Kevin Lamont has written a wonderful book called Sheet Music, Uncovering the Secrets of Sexual Intimacy in Marriage. Those are great things to read before you even get married. If you are already married and read them together, that's fine too. But they do give you a little more practical advice about how to prepare your body even for intimacy, because it isn't just something that naturally happens easily for a lot of people. It's something you have to work on. And I guess the other part of a piece of advice that I'd give is for people to take a natural family planning course before they get married, so that they can understand the way our bodies work in more depth. Because a lot of times women, we know we get our period, but we don't really know what's going on in the cycle throughout that. And I know for a lot of our bachelorettes who have done natural family planning, they talk to me and they say, wow, I had no idea how amazing my body is that it's doing all of this every month. And they have so much more awareness and respect for the way the Lord made us from taking a class like that.
I also want to mention a book that I know a lot of people have utilized. It's been very helpful, because we don't often talk about the struggle for women and kind of that fear, but also the pain that some women experience as well. And I know it's kind of like, whoa, this is a lot for Catholic radio. But one really great book is by Dr. Cliff and Mrs. Joyce Penner. They're sex therapists, and it's called Enjoy, the Gift of Sexual Pleasure for Women, because this is something that a lot of women do struggle with. And it creates a lot of tension within marriages at times with regard to no, honey, or yes, honey.
Yes, thank you, Timmerie, for bringing that up, because it's such a taboo topic that women who are virgins a lot of times in the beginning experience pain in intimacy. That's a normal thing. And especially if you just got married and have no idea and have been so much, oh, I don't want to think about sex, I don't want to think about intimacy, it will lead me into sin. I know a lot of people are were like that before they got married, and then they're hit with this and they say, wait, it's painful. I didn't know this. Was there something wrong with me? And they'll go through months of seeing doctors, and because it's not a common topic, we don't get prepared in marriage counseling usually for these things. But I do want to encourage people to know that is normal. It's something that can work, that the couple can work through together. Those books have some great tips for the pain that women feel initially, and it can go away, and you can learn and you can enjoy intimacy more and more in the marriage. But that's normal. I just want women to feel comfortable and okay with that, and they don't have to freak out if something like that happens on their honeymoon and they weren't expecting that. And I wish more women knew that, because I hear so many women coming to me afterwards saying that, and I'm glad I can provide the perspective of that. No, actually, that's normal, and you don't have to be upset and freak out about it.
Any kind of quick tip recommendations for those who have struggled with remaining chaste before marriage, not necessarily having boundaries, and then going into a marriage where they want to be chaste, but they don't really know how to kind of help heal the wounds that have been present from that past?
Yes. I think prayer is really important here. And if you're a listener, you've been physically intimate with someone in the past, you definitely want to bring that to the Lord and bring that to confession, and ask also for the Lord to break that soul tie that you've had with that person. And also ask him to help you find the beauty in intimacy, and to for that relaxation that is important, that you can enjoy with your spouse, because this is the relationship that you've committed to, and you don't have to feel shame about the intimacy with your husband or wife, that this is something that you can really enjoy. So I would say praying through it and really allowing yourself to relax and enjoy the experience with your husband or wife.
Many women who are chaste feel insecure and have body image concerns about sexual intimacy. And I don't even think it's just women who have waited till marriage. It can be a lot of women either way. Maybe someone who feels like, they've been taken advantage of, or who have experienced sexual abuse, rape in the past. How do you handle these delicate situations with your clients?
Yes, it's very sensitive, and very sensitive issues. That's why I encourage women to guard the way they guard their heart is to guard their bodies as much as possible. But obviously sexual abuse is not something they could have prevented. It happened, and it's not their fault. So for these kinds of situations, I always encourage our members to know that your value and worth comes from the Lord, that we're all made in His image and likeness. And we want to be able to take care of our bodies, to listen to our bodies. Our bodies tell us a lot of things, whether we need to exercise or eat or sleep, and pay attention to that. And then the more that we get in tune with our bodies, the more we can love our bodies. And then we're more comfortable if we're entering a marriage, we will be more excited and not ashamed, and know that we're not perfect, but that our husband or wife will appreciate us the way that God made us, and it's a special gift that you've made that commitment with that person, so you can trust that person in these very intimate times that you may have felt violated before. And it's normal, and it takes time. So if you have just those fears and anxieties around that, that's also very normal. I don't want you to shame yourself or feel like there's something wrong with you. It's normal if you've experienced that. But that's why I encourage women to, as much as they can, to guard their bodies before getting married, so they don't have to deal with that drama that is a natural part if you've experienced and that being intimate with someone before, or being violated before, that you couldn't have prevented.
That's a great answer, Christina. And kind of just two things following up on what you had to say is, one, if that insecurity is present, I think it's important to remember He chose you. He has offered His life for you. There's something about you, many things about you, that He adores. And so that insecurity should be affirmed by the commitment that He has made, and the commitments made within a Christian marriage, within the vows of marriage. He loves you. And I think the second perspective I have here is, if there's maybe a red flag that's leading to this insecurity, really discover, is there something going on in his behavior possibly that is leading to this insecurity, or maybe how you're engaging prior to marriage that is causing this, that really needs to be taken care of. It might even be a deal breaker. These are tough questions that we have to unpack. Always joining us with her keen insights is the co-founder of Matchmakers in the City, Christina Pineda. You can find them at matchmakersinthecity.com. Join me tomorrow with Father Tim Grumbach. We'll talk about anointing the sick and adoration to take you through these challenging days in the church.